All
Okay.
right. It is now 11 a.m. I'm just going to do a quick introduction. Up next is Dr. Justin Lewis from Olympic College. Olympic College, by the way, I think one of the biggest showings of people here. So maybe it was you telling them to come, or maybe they found out about it. Um, Justin Lewis, are you ready to go?
Yeah, sure.
Right,
Um,
take it away.
Thank you, Ronald. I appreciate it. So yeah, my name is Justin Lewis. I'm a English faculty at Olympic College. This presentation is called GAI for Qualitative Data Analysis using Chat Plus to make information from data. A couple of caveats about this presentation before I start. One is I originally had using chatbots, but I changed it to Chat Plus because at this point, most of what I'm going to go over in this session can really only be done by that chatbot at present. Gemini, the paid version of Gemini can't run. I found it to be very difficult to run Python effectively, and Claude doesn't have that ability really either, even though I love Claude for the most part, and that's the one that I use more frequently than others. So, for what it's worth, this is mostly going to use Chat Plus. If you're not a Chat Plus user, that's okay. This will either be it's not a sales pitch, but maybe you'll be interested in it. Um, so yeah, that's one caveat. The second caveat is I kind of designed this because I work in when I'm doing research, when I'm thinking about anything, I'm really thinking about kind of qualitative research. And I think this what we're going to cover hopefully might be useful for somebody that's just like an academic administrator that's trying to gather a quick temperature of, a survey that they ran with their faculty to understand how their perceptions of the guided pathways transition was working or whatever, implementation, whatever. Or it could be you could use some of this work if you're interested in doing actual sort of, you're trying to submit your research to a peer reviewed journal or you're trying to publish research, et cetera. So, you know, what do they say in football? Like if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have any. So like maybe this will just end up being useless. I hope that's not the case. Um, so if y'all are ready, we'll go ahead and get started. So a little bit about me, just like where am I coming from here? I have done qualitative research almost exclusively in my academic career. When I was doing my dissertation research, I was working on trying to understand pirates on the internet. And the way I was trying to understand pirates on the internet was related to their sort of perceptions of intellectual property and copyright. And so the way I kind of parsed that was I collected thousands upon thousands of forum posts around intellectual property in digital environments. And based on those forum posts, I conducted qualitative research to kind of come up with a theory about piratical resistance, I guess you might say. So that was some of my first work in qualitative research. Since then, I've done a lot of work with user experience design and more specifically user research in user experience design. So I'm interested in kind of understanding like what are the feelings, the perceptions of users of a given piece of technology, and what are the pain points? What do they really enjoy? What do they hate, et cetera? And how we do that is often qualitative research, right? Through analyzing things like interviews and surveys and heat maps and all sorts of stuff. So, and then AI. I just like AI. It's interesting. I was one of three AI ambassadors at Olympic College this year, which was a cool position that the VPI opened up, basically to help our faculty sort of problem solve and work through some of the challenges that come with AI. So, um, if your institution's not doing that, if there's no point person or they don't have somebody in that position, I'd recommend that they do because I think it's actually quite valuable, especially from a policy standpoint. Um, yeah. So let's kind of the way this presentation is going to work is I'm going to overview kind of what qualitative textual data is, and then I'm going to give you kind of a methodological approach to working through it, and then how AI can supplement that approach as we kind of go through it. Um, but what is qualitative textual data, and what can we learn from it, or what shape does it take? What is it? Well, I mean, qualitative data is textual data that provides kind of a richness of depth that you may not get from quantitative data or numbers-based data, right? So, it provides a detailed and kind of nuanced understanding of the subject being studied, the phenomena that you're trying to study. It can capture emotions, motivations, attitudes, and hopefully context in which the phenomena that you're interested in studying occur, right? So that is beautiful, but it's also messy. which is part of the challenge of qualitative data analysis. It provides context or contextualization, like I just mentioned, of a given phenomena within a broader sort of social, cultural fields. And it offers opportunities for interpretation of the researcher, right? So you're interpreting the meanings and the patterns that you find within qualitative data, textual data, as a way to kind of understand how participants construct their reality and also the phenomena that exist inside of that given space. So it can be very rich, but like I said, it's messy often. What can we learn from it? Well, we can learn a lot about themes and patterns by analyzing this data. We can kind of identify what themes come up again and again and again in participants' responses or narratives. That's really valuable no matter kind of if you're doing a low fidelity quick look at data or if you want something that's very rigorous. Both of those are going to, if you can identify what's the themes or the patterns in data, that's invaluable. It can also provide us attitudinal data, or we can learn about attitudes toward data or attitudes toward phenomena rather, right? So textual data can reveal beliefs, attitudes, perceptions, provide insight into how our research subjects might be working. It can give us some behavioral data in terms of processes and dynamics by kind of uncovering some of the interactions or the dynamics that are in play within a specific setting or a group, shedding light on how some of those behaviors might emerge. And then through that whole process, we might be able to glean some social or cultural sort of norms and maybe some outliers. So it can give us a ton of information, which is why it's so valuable. What shape does it take? Good question. It could take a lot, but what we most commonly see are things like interviews, things like surveys, focus groups, and the sort of transcription of focus group recordings, field notes, it could be diaries, documents. If you're doing any kind of, investigation into sort of workplace communications or the way that documents sort of structure the immigrant experience, or certainly documents, the way documents play a pivotal role in shaping a patient experience in healthcare settings. Like those are all different forms of qualitative textual data. Online forums, social media posts. I mean, if you can think of it and it's not just a series of numbers, it's probably qualitative data, right? So it's a ton of different stuff, which makes it really exciting, but also makes it really kind of difficult to work with sometimes. Whoops. There we go. I kind of covered this a little bit, so I'll go through here briefly, but what kind of analysis is best suited for the data that you need and the research questions that you have? I'm just going to talk about a couple today. One of them is thematic analysis. I'm also going to look a little bit about attitudinal analysis because I see those as being um, accessible for multiple disciplines, right? The kind of research you might do across lots of different fields. And then genre analysis. So a thematic analysis might look something like this example here of analyzing transcripts from healthcare workers about recurring challenges as a result of COVID-19, right? So you're going to be looking for patterns in that data to kind of characterize that experience inside of that sort of phenomena. Attitudinal research, right? Investigating students' attitudes toward learning, teaching methods, or educational policies as a way to kind of enhance educational practices. That would be looking at student attitudes. Or in my own field, in English and rhetoric and composition specifically, we do a lot of genre analysis, which is kind of trying to understand how genres and documents, written documents, kind of shape the experience of people. So the example I have here, how do different stakeholders influence the form and content of internal professional communications in a cybersecurity setting? So, C-level individuals are going to participate in document creation and write in a way that looks a lot different from maybe an intro level analyst or something. And so what does that tell us about organizational culture, power dynamics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? There are so many different kinds of analysis. As on the bottom here, I list a bunch of them, but we don't have the time nor the interest necessarily in going over them. I did notice that some of you have a sociological or anthropological background, and that's excellent. So you're probably pretty familiar with some of this stuff. Some of you may not, and that's totally fine too. You don't even need it. It's just trying to. There are so many different ways to do this work, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So this is what the life cycle looks like in terms of a qualitative research project. And these slides will be shared. So I assume, so you can access them later, but we'll start at the top with data acquisition, which is exactly what it sounds like. How do you get your data? Then we'll talk a little bit about data preparation. So how do you prepare your data for analysis? The third thing we'll talk about is data segmentation. If that's not something you're familiar with, it's infuriatingly hard. But I think that AI offers us some good opportunities to sort of intervene with the machine to help us sort of work through that in ways. We're going to talk a little bit about coding, and coding is the imperfect sort of the thing that the AI I would say is the least qualified to do really effectively, and because of the human interpretive element. But we can talk about that more later. I have iterate here, but that's really not an accurate representation because iteration is going to happen at any of these stages. And our question is really, where do we integrate AI into this process if this is what our qualitative research sort of design looks like? So a brief note on inspo. So a lot of the stuff that comes from this talk comes out of this book from Cheryl Giesler and Jason Swartz. It is linked. It's a free open access book you can get through the WAC clearinghouse at Colorado State University. It's called Coding Streams of Language Techniques for the Systematic Coding of Text, Talk, and Verbal Data. It's an older book, so there's no AI mentioned in it. But if you're wondering what the sort of methodological kind of orientations that underpin the work that I'm talking about, you'll find it in this book. Giesler's at Simon Fraser and Swartz is at NC State. They draw heavily on the tradition of grounded theory. So if you have a background in Glaser and Strauss or Charmas, then you're probably going to be familiar with the kind of general rhythm or cycle that this research is going to move through. So I wouldn't say it's riveting reading, but it's excellent if you need something to help you sort of structure your research project. So let's start. Step one, data acquisition. Do you already have your data? If you do, then you don't need to worry about this part. You can just sort of zone out for the next 45 seconds or something. Great. Proceed to preparation. That might be a good thing. It could also be a bad thing. But if you don't have your data yet, deciding what kind of data to collect is always a really important question because it's going to be related to what research questions are you trying to answer and what activities are most appropriate for your question, right? So if you're conducting interviews, you're probably looking for a smaller sort of sample size, but a rich sort of detailed account. Whereas if you're conducting surveys, right, you're trying to get a broader kind of perspective from a larger group, but maybe not as deep and rich the data. Or are you collecting documents that try to sort of point to, writing practices or organizational culture or whatever? So what kind of a instrument you use is related to the question that you're trying to answer, which you're probably aware of, but sometimes that's a lot more complex than it sounds. And then also, what are the logistics of collection? Maybe you're an academic administrator and you're just trying to get, faculty sort of attitudes towards something. You can just design something quickly and send it off. Great. But let's say you're a researcher and you're trying to move this project forward, and you're dealing with human subjects and you have to engage institutional review board policy and you have to work through time constraints and you have a, deadline or whatever. So just being aware of those logistics of collection are also something you want to be aware of. How can AI help in this process? That's not the focus of this presentation per se, because I'm more interested in some of the later stages, but there are things that AI can do. AI is absolutely excellent at survey and interview design. In my experience, it's really wonderful at making sure you're asking, one question and not multiple questions, or it's really good at uncovering implicit bias that might be embedded in any of your survey or interview questions, that sort of thing. So as something to kind of bounce against and ensure you have sort of sound question design, AI is wonderful for that. IRB applications. AI knows genres really well, in my experience. It understands sort of textual genres, applications, grants, grant applications, call for papers, whatever it might be. And so I would absolutely use AI to help you assist you in your IRB application if you have to do that. Automated collection. This is something that's relatively recent. The past 6 months or so, there have been a lot of organizations that are selling, or hopefully we can find some free versions for you to develop a chatbot like, ChatGPT Plus has the My GPTs, which is basically your own chatbot. You can't access the transcriptions of the conversations with it, but there are ones where you can. And so automated collection using a chatbot that you design is a kind of cool way to acquire some data. And then, this isn't AI per se, but there have been a lot of automated data gathering and scraping tools like Python uses a couple of scripts like Scrapey or Beautiful Soup. And there are even web platforms like Octoparse or Import that can scrape publicly available data for you, social media data, that kind of thing. So AI can assist in that process, but again, that's not necessarily going to be the focus of this particular session. So you've got your data now. Let's just assume that. This is where it starts to get actually interesting. Oops, I'm going to play that in a second. A quick caveat. I didn't want chat to screw up while I was doing this, so I recorded my videos and embedded them in the presentation. So in a second, maybe we'll try one and make sure that it works, if that's okay. Um, Data preparation. So I know I'm running through this pretty quick, but this is where we start getting into something where we can actually use chat. Um, let's say that you did a bunch of interviews, which is awesome, or you have a lot of survey data, but probably interview data, and you used an AI tool of some sort to transcribe that data, and now you have 120 pages of Word documents. I mean, that's nice. Unfortunately, the challenge there is that is not what is called structured data. It's unstructured data. And the difference between those two things is unstructured data doesn't have a lot of metadata attached to it. And let me give you an example. When you look at a Word document, you just have just a series of paragraphs or a bunch of text, right? Um, but if you look at an Excel file, and you look at your different cells, right? You might look at column A and column B, and then from column B, you might go down to row number 3, and you go down and you have an individual cell, right? That cell has metadata attached to it, and what lives inside of that cell is B3. So a big step in making chatbots be able to process your data effectively is to make it structured data as opposed to unstructured data. Um, and thankfully, in addition to being able to process that data, they can actually help you get it in that format in a pretty effective way. So let's quickly, if it's okay, I'll play this video and we'll see if it works. Tell me if you can hear it. Whoop. I went one page too far. Let me go back. There we go. Could y'all hear that? Can someone give me a thumbs up or something? I don't have my chat open.
Can you play it for another second?
Yes or no?
I'm not hearing it.
I
Oh
can't hear
man,
anything.
that is a downer. Hmm.
Just if you
Hmm.
you can turn it on the sound,
Oh, I could turn it on the sound on
like
my
on the
on my
share.
computer.
Yeah.
Oh, on the shared. Okay. Let's see here. Sound, same as speaker. Headphones, same as headphones.
When you go to the green share button, make sure that you click on the advanced tab, and then there should be a little checkbox that should say share sound. I'm going to share a screenshot of this in the chat.
Okay,
Maybe
sorry.
stop sharing for a second and then share again, and then you should see the check.
Okay. I'm so sorry.
There's a little share sound checkbox on the right there. Do you see it?
On the right of what?
When you click the green share button, there should be a
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Share sound. I see it. Okay. Let me try now. For data that it's far better to use.
there you
Could you
go.
hear that?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
For analysis.
All right, cool. All right.
Okay, so in this brief recording, I'm just going to show you how to use Chat Plus to turn your unstructured data into structured data that it's far better to use for analysis. So let's start with just a quick question.
Says I have a long Word document that I want to turn into structured data in a CSV file, extract the text from the Word document. Next, number column 1 sequentially. Next, input each paragraph into a separate cell. In column 2, are you ready for the document? It says, yeah, go ahead, give it to me, give it to them, and then it gives you the CSV file.
Okay, so now you can see that basically I have a CSV file. This is the original document, but now it's been parsed by paragraph for the entire piece. And now we can actually do something with this, right?
Okay, so relatively simple. Didn't adopt a persona or anything. I just ask it to do that thing and then give me a CSV file of that thing now that it's been translated or transferred into a structured format, right? So now it just did it paragraph by paragraph. This is an academic article draft, basically, is what I was working with. So sometimes whenever you get that data transferred over, you're ready to clean it a little bit. So now it's structured, but there might be a bunch of stuff in that data that you don't need. Now you can do this by hand, or you can ask AI to do it for you. And so in this video, that's kind of what we're going to do by asking AI to basically remove null data and shape the text a little bit. Okay, so data that's structured, right? Hopefully it's in a CSV file. Sometimes there's a lot of stuff in that file that you may not need. So what we're looking at here is actually the top American universities on Reddit post sample set that I posted in the messaging kind of little thing on the right side of the Whova interface a couple days ago. This is a sample data set of basically posts on Reddit related to the top universities. I just basically took the first, I think maybe 5,000 posts here from Brown University. But as you can see, as we look at this document, there's a lot of stuff that says removed, right? And so like that kind of stuff is not great. Like these kind of that it kind of corrupts your data in some senses, right? It kind of makes it so you're getting a bunch of information that you don't really need in there. And so one thing that we can do is we can use generative AI to help us clean that data a little bit. Right, so this is what that process looks like. So let's head back over to chat and let's basically say, well, just ride along and you'll see. So I just say I need to clean some null data from a CSV file, open the attached file, delete any row that includes reference to removed, and then give me a CSV file back. So I don't have to let you see the rest of it. It's pretty straightforward. But
Those rows that
one of the things you'll notice if you watch the rest of that video is I found some other things that I didn't want in there, some other data. And so I just, basically asked chat to do the same thing. Could you do that in Excel? Yes. Could you do it just using a couple of shortcuts? Probably you could. But, I'm not an Excel expert. I don't love using it for the most part. And so for me, it's easier sometimes to just ask it to remove that null data and shape the text in some way. So yeah, those are sort of two examples of what you can use chat for in terms of, no, Claude can't do this level of work, Christina. Chat Plus is the only one that seems to be able to do it. I don't think it's necessarily because of size. I think it's because of its ability to run Python scripts. Sorry, that was a question from the chat. So let's look a little bit about the next stage, because this is where things actually get really interesting for me. Well, you've got your data, you've got it structured, you have removed the trash data that you want from it. You can do multiple other things in that sort of cleaning and preparation stage too that I didn't go over today, like focusing on one kind of response. For example, there's another data set where I'm like, oh, let's basically, yes, of course, confidential data would be a problem. If you run your own GPT though, on Chat GPT, you can tell it you can opt out of data collection if you have Chat Plus, Paul, to answer that, to sort of respond to that a little bit. So let's talk about segmentation. If you're, and this is again, depending on the fidelity of the research that you're trying to do, but if you want to do kind of research toward publication or something where you really want some good counts, you need to be able to segment the data to isolate what size of a segment the phenomena that you want to research occurs in, right? So in other words, each of those segments or each cell in Excel needs to be dedicated to a discrete code that you will do in the coding process if you want to count it as A or B or C. And so segmentation is the process whereby we figure out what data you want to what the size of the data needs to be. Here are some examples. Let's say you wanted to segment by sentence. So what is a sentence? It's a discrete unit of thought or expression, right? What might you use that for? Let's say you were analyzing patient records to identify the frequency and types of sentences used in conveying medical instructions. Are they imperative? Are they interrogative? Are they exclamatory, etc.? So you might want to take your data and segment it by individual sentence. Topical chain, that's one that I use most frequently in my own work, which is basically a sequence of text that's focused on a specific topic, but might span over multiple sentences. So each time that there is a shift in the topic, we want to make a new segment because we want each segment to be dedicated to that one topic, right? And so that would be like analyzing online discussion threads to trace the development of topics and ideas over time. You can do all sorts of segment sizes. I'm not going to go into great depth about these right now, but you could do speaker turns if you're interested in studying something like doctor-patient interactions to explore the effects of communication styles on patient satisfaction. Or this would also be quite useful if you're in an ESL, EFL context, trying to understand the sort of teacher-student-speaker relationship. Exchanges would also be good at that, where you capture the entire exchange as opposed to just turns. You can do tiny things like verbals and nominals. There's all sorts of segments that you can do. The choice here, I can't tell you what it is. I don't know what your research project is. I don't know. But whatever your phenomena is, you need a segment size that captures the phenomena, and it's not too big and it's not too small. This is a total Goldilocks problem. So chat is actually quite useful at helping that process.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you an example of what resegmenting your data might look like when using Chat Plus. So this process is extremely laborious if you do it by hand. I did it all by hand some years ago when I wrote my dissertation, and it takes forever. And finding the right segment size is also a real challenge, right? As sort of we kind of covered in the last slide. So here I'm going to show you basically how I have been using chat to achieve that process with a lot more sort of expediency. So anyhow, I went ahead and wrote a prompt. So I'm just going to paste it in here. It basically says I'm conducting a qualitative analysis project of textual data. Specifically, I'm looking into how this writer makes particular rhetorical moves. So in my particular field, like, and those moves are things like defining terms, making claims, qualifying statements, citing sources, using connectives to bridge, right, to move the reader between one area and another, counter-arguing, clarifying, summarizing, etc. So those are the things that I'm interested in being able to sort of isolate in this academic article. But I need to resegment the data right, because right now that data is in a paragraph format. But inside of a given paragraph, there might be multiple moves that are made. And so I'm going to try to resegment this data using topical chains as the method of segmentation. The reason why I chose topical chains is a topical chain is basically any kind of collection of sentences or even a single sentence or idea that is related to one idea or one thing. Now, is it the perfect segment size? I don't know. Maybe not. But it is definitely better than paragraphs, because often a writer in a paragraph might make 5 or 6 different rhetorical moves, whereas if a writer is kind of dealing with a discrete idea or notion, maybe less of those moves happen. I suppose I could try to even process or segment by rhetorical moves, but I'm not sure what that would give. Anyhow, so let's try this out. So I say using the attached CSV file, segment the data using topical chains as the method of segmentation. At present, the segmentation is by paragraph. After you've segmented the data, create a new CSV for download. So let's go ahead and upload that. And yep, okay. Let's go. See.
Okay, so in the interest of being able to have some time to talk, yeah, it went through it and did it. In retrospect, topical chains, probably not necessarily the best segment size. I did try to segment based on rhetorical moves. It did not understand that. So that would have been a lot cooler, but it did not understand that. But it did do a good job of segmenting via topical chains. So this is one thing that you can use Chat for. Chat Plus for is sort of being able to segment your data into the segmentation size that is most appropriate to capture that sort of phenomena. So again, segmentation recap, right? What is your phenomena? what segment size best captures that phenomena, resegment the structured data that you have into that new segmentation size, and then you can proceed to the coding process. Excuse me. There was a question in the chat. Rajesh asked, did you compare your own data segmentation for your PhD data with how chat did it? I did. It worked pretty well with segmentation. It did not work well with coding, which is where we're at now. So let's talk a little bit about that, if that's okay. And there'll be hopefully some time where we can talk a little bit. So coding. Some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not, and that's okay. But coding is just the process now. We've got our segments, they're structured. We're ready to sit down and be like, well, what do they say? What kind of analysis? Is it thematic analysis? Is it an attitudinal analysis? What are we looking for? And can we code that data? There are kind of, I adopt very loosely these terms from Glaser and Strauss here between open and axial theoretical coding. But if you're doing soft coding, you just want a quick picture of your data, open coding, AI is great. If your goal is to understand the data's themes, the patterns, some of the meanings that are inside of it, it just requires that your data is segmented and that you have a coding schema. We're going to develop one of those in just a second. However, if you are trying to sort of have the machine do the actual coding for you of which we call sort of axial or sort of theoretical coding, which is like specific codes and subcodes, and get a high rate of inter-rater reliability, it's not there yet. Okay. Does that mean it's not useful? Absolutely not. Right. It's absolutely useful. If you've done any of this kind of work, you understand that, like, you will code part of your data set and you'll realize that your schema doesn't work and you have to go back and rework your schema so you can try to more accurately capture it. Or sometimes you have to go all the way back and resegment your data so the phenomena ends up being captured in a different segment size. So when you bring it to the coding schema, it works. All that being said, it doesn't mean it's not valuable. And I think it's a wonderful heuristic for seeing where there might be some weaknesses, but I would not rely on the machine to do your hard coded data if you're trying to push this towards some sort of like methodologically rigorous activity. Okay. So all that being said, let's talk about what you can use chat for in terms of coding. Well, the first thing you need to code anything is a schema. Right. And so this is a schema that I developed in my dissertation. I was trying to understand a lot of pirates' events as sort of economic resistance toward intellectual property. They give economic justifications for why they steal things. And so this is the coding schema that I developed in that process. What it says isn't important. The structure here is what I want you to pay attention to. So it has a name, coding economic resistance. We have code names and abbreviations, right? So anti-corporate is a code, preview is a code, direct contribution was a code. Those things have definitions, right? Preview, code is preview, any topical chain that references the desire to preview purchase before purchasing as a reason to justify non-payment for media. And then examples of code in the data. So these are examples that I drew from the forum posts that describe that code. Why do we do this? Well, at the end of the day, if you want to produce any kind of a theory about what's going on, you need a series of codes, and those codes have to represent the data, right? The data has to drive the development of those codes. And then at the end of the day, you can quantify those if you would like. So in this case, I thought it would be anti-corporate would be the big code, but it wasn't that at all. It had a lot more to do with direct contribution in my own research project. So you have to have a coding schema, and this is where I would argue that chat really does a wonderful, wonderful job to help you in that process. So let's look at what that looks like.
Okay, so in this video, I'm just going to kind of quickly go over how I do a little bit of training with chat to develop coding schema whenever I'm working with qualitative data. And then I am going to kind of show you how I then push chat to, once I've trained it on what I want the coding schema to look like, I'll ask chat to develop some categories and then develop a coding schema for my data. So let's start with the first part of that process. So first thing I'm going to do here is I'm basically going to say, I want you to use a coding schema that I've developed in the past as an example for you to use to develop a coding schema related to different data. so I say first have a look at this coding schema and tell me the parts that it includes. So in other words, I'm basically asking it for what is the organization that you see here. So this is a coding schema that I developed during my dissertation. I can show it to you in a second, but basically it looks like it's the same one that you saw on the previous slide. So basically we have an objective. What is it that this coding schema is used for? What are the coding categories? So, and that has the name, right? The definition, any sort of references to intellectual property. So it basically kind of just goes over the parts. So, you know, does a good job of understanding what I want to do. So, or what that particular document is. So then I'm going to ask it basically based on that. I'm going to say, hey, if you were going to copy a coding schema like this in terms of organization, what would an outline of that schema look like? So it goes through here and it basically takes the information that was in my coding schema before and it kind of extrapolates it into a generic outline, right? So we have category 1, definition, subcode, subcode 1A, subcode 1B, right? Great. So it does a nice job creating an outline of what I'm looking for. So now it's time for me to get into trying to develop the actual coding schema for. Okay, so particular document is. So then I'm going to ask it basically based on that. I'm going to say, hey, if you were going to copy a coding schema, subcode 1A, subcode 1. Sorry, I'm just trying to get it. Apparently it's not loading, which is super cool. Which I also use chat to isolate. So I'm going to add that spreadsheet in here, and I'm basically going to say, okay, so this data is segmented by post on a Reddit. Oh my Lord. Best laid plans. Okay, so anyways, what happens here, if we can skip, I'm just going to skip forward and narrate it for you. That's that's really a shame. I recorded the videos because I was like, oh, I don't want chat to totally like crap out on me in the middle of the presentation, and instead the presentation software did, and that's great. So it does it, is the short answer. Basically, I ask it to look at these newly matriculated Brown posts of students that had posted on Reddit. I had taken that big data set. I said, now isolate it from newly matriculated related posts. True story, Ronald. And then based on that newly matriculated data, I want you to come up with 4 to 5 common themes that you see in the data. Right. And it does a nice job of first identifying what those themes are. And then at the end of that process, I basically just say, okay, cool. Thanks for the themes. Now I want you to take those themes and I want you to use the data and I want you to copy the organization that I gave you before for the coding schema. And I want you to write a coding schema for me, which is exactly what it does. It's just a shame that you'll never know what that looks like. So if you watch the presentation at some other point, maybe it'll work. Maybe it's because I live in the boonies and the internet doesn't work well here. So great, you have a coding schema. It does a really good job with coding schema development, and it's really good if you're looking for like a quick look. One of the things that noticed in this coding schema is it had 2 categories that were quite similar. So I asked it to rewrite the coding schema once it gave me the first iteration and collapse those categories because it didn't want to count similar data if I just felt like they were in the same category. That process is, that's the iterative sort of process that happens. Okay, so this video obviously won't work either, but I'm going to narrate it for you and kind of tell you, and it'll give us a little more time to talk stuff over here at the end anyway. So this video, 8.5 minutes, I was only going to show you a few, but this video actually does the coding. So once you have your coding schema, you could have it in a Word document or whatever. You can ask chat to basically, hey, here's my coding schema. Here's my data in a CSV file. I want you to code it, right? Go through and assign codes to each individual segment. When you're done, get back to me with a newly updated CSV file and some percentages for what those codes end up looking like. Now, this is where I would say that AI is not really quite there yet.
right, because it requires a human sort of interpretive move every time we look at a segment, and it can only sort of predict so much since it's a predictive sort of technology. So, if you're looking for inter-rater reliability, this isn't probably the way to do it. One of the things I've done is I basically ask it to code 10% of my data set, and then I will code 10% of the same data set, and then I compare those codes to check for inter-rater reliability. But with the machine, I've never gotten above sort of 70-ish%. Depending on your field, that's not really high enough. In my field, we need something usually in the 80s to 90s. So like that's just not going to cut it. So that's a reflection that either your segment size is wrong or your coding schema is not reflective of the data itself. So again, you have to iterate in this process, but the whole point of this sort of presentation was just to show that AI can really assist in that iterative kind of activity, if that's where you're going. So to kind of recap, I'm sorry I couldn't show you those videos. It's really disappointing. To kind of recap, and yellow means and blue means pretty good. AI can be used in the preparation process, getting your data ready. It can be used to segment your data. It can definitely be used to develop coding schema. It's not great at coding yet, and it can be used in different aspects in your acquisition process, but it's not necessarily AI. There's a lot of technologies that can help you acquire data. Okay. So I had a couple of activities, but there's no way we will probably be able to run these. So we have like 10 minutes. And if I can get it to go backward, you can now grill me about this, because it's sort of, I've talked to a couple of different researchers, and some of them are open to this and some of them believe it's anathema. So I'm just sort of curious about what questions you may have about applications, utilities, experiences, etc. Oh yeah, you can see the activities. I was basically, so there's a couple of data sets that are linked from the Whova page under the Q&A. There's a couple of data sets rather. And so these were going to be just sort of a series of challenges that you might explore in terms of turning unstructured data into structured data, removing data from a CSV, segmenting based on a given phenomena, coding schema development, and then actually coding. So Greg says, I'm moving into a project-based learning to have students do things instead of generating instant AI writing. So this gave me an idea to give them raw data sets. Yes. I mean, one of the most amazing things that I do on like the second day of class is I have a CSV file that's just the passenger manifest of the Titanic. And I basically stick it into Chat Plus and I say, just tell me some interesting things about this data. And you don't even have to tell it what you want to see. It'll tell you all sorts of interesting things, like, things that you would expect. For example, the people that were on the upper tier in terms of economic class, units on the ship had a higher proportion of survival. That's a correlation that you might expect to find. But there were some other ones where, like, people that were minorities survived at a higher rate than the general populace. Like weird things like that. But yeah, those are the kinds of things that are really interesting that you can pull from data. And there's so much publicly available data out there that you can just start, like those Reddit posts, like you could have them do all sorts of stuff like that as a way to sort of get toward primary research. What does primary research look like? How can it be assisted with technology? That sort of thing. It doesn't have to be this rigorous, right? But if you're just trying to conduct a thematic analysis, it could absolutely do that.
Hey, Justin, I have the link to the zip file you sent us. Do you want me to put that into the chat for people to get?
I mean, you can, yeah. I think it's just a series of, I think it's just all the data sets and schema and stuff. So you're more than welcome to drop that in there if anybody's interested, just so they can have that to play with. But really, the key for this, at least in my experience, is just playing with it. My institutional research at Olympic College is a wonderful resource, but often they just give me, their job is not to contextualize or interpret the data, it's to provide me with the data that I ask for. right? And so I'm not a statistical analyst. I don't speak R or SPSS in great sort of fluency. I can use it a little bit, but so this has really helped me be able to, for example, take a data set from my institutional research around, trying to understand the relationship between enrollment numbers, retention, and race, right? So like this gives me a way to get into that, and then of course you double check your work. But Greg says, what are your thoughts about how to cite it? Well, I mean, MLA and APA have guidelines around citation of chat. That's what you do. I mean, you have to acknowledge your collaborator if it's a machine, and so like I think that you just acknowledge it. Most of the journals that I see at this point have editorial policies that kind of state that you're more than welcome to use it as long as it's acknowledged. And so I think that's an important thing. We don't want it to get a Google Scholar profile or a, be pretty cool, be really high on the metrics. Yeah, probably. Other questions? No? Okay. Um, Sorry, this is sort of a, kind of a deep dive into one particular sort of social science research methodology. But if you're, if you're somebody that deals a lot with data and you're tired of reading it and you need to be able to do some distant reading of that data, which I would argue this is kind of what that is, then this allows you to, you know, make sense of things a little more quickly than you might if you were doing it sort of all from scratch. But to do that, you got to get the data in a format that the machine wants to work with, and you got to find your phenomena and get it in the right size, and then do some work with it. So if you have any questions and if you ever want to talk more, you can find me here. I like talking about this kind of stuff. So, always happy to talk shop, etc.
All right. Well, if nobody's got any questions now, why don't we give a round of applause or a round of reactions for Justin? Oh, a link to the slideshow. It's online right now, the one that you're working on, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it. I'll share it right now here. Just a sec.
Cool. Definitely some interesting stuff. I've worn my pirate cap a bit in the early 2000s. So had to get
Cool.
my pirate voice going.
That's right. Yeah.
So
Trying to figure out this. Let me stop the screen share. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. It disappeared. There we go. So bad at Zoom. Okay, cool.
we got the sound working. We got the sound working, and then the videos didn't load. So all the things.
I mean, they're there for posterity, so everyone can. as you're wondering, what are you going to watch? The Olympics or Justin's 9-minute long coding process? It's a hard sell. It's hard to say.
You get some data about the Olympics. All right, so Justin, you feel free to hang out in here. I'm going to share my screen and let people know what is coming up next in this room. And then everybody else, I am putting a link to the other tracks if you are interested in joining those. So up next, Dr. Johnny Palavita dos Santos. Dr. Johnny, are you in here by any chance? We just gotta go find Johnny.